The information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as personal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional or expert in the relevant field for personalised advice tailored to your specific situation.
Financial advice, if you look at the spectrum of it, is broken into a variety of different concepts and structures. Now, what I mean by that is a holistic view of looking at financial planning from what financial planner covers is tax planning. It's around social security systems. It's around insurances. It's around superannuation. It's around aged care. It's around any other part of intrinsic part of other part of advice like UK pensions or any other form of estate planning. So there's a broad range of topics that are ingrained in financial planning. It all depends again on customers' specific circumstances and how do we sort of plan that each stage of their life out is sort of how the financial planner add value there.
Welcome to our next The Wealth Guide podcast episode. My name is Jasmine Loke and I'm the General Manager at Ryker Capital. I'm extremely proud to have three of my very senior advisors with me today to discuss the topic of financial advice. Is it only for the rich? So I might just get the guys to introduce themselves. Ray.
Hi, Jazz. Excited to be here. Ray Regmi, Senior Financial Planner at Ryker Capital. Been in the advice or the financial services for approximately around 18 years.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dean Dasuki. I've also been in the financial services industry for around about 13 years. And time flies when you're having fun.
Finally, me, Ricky Regmi, Senior Advisor at Ryker Capital. Been in the industry for over 17 years.
Amazing. Really good to have you with me today. And I mean, look, all of you guys in your tenure as financial advisors and bankers would have dealt with some really rich people. There's a lot of nodding going on here and some smiling. I know, Ray, you look after a couple of high-flying CEOs and other things. So what are your thoughts on this idea that financial advice is only for the rich?
I've got this all the time, Jazz. That advice is not for me. It's only for the super rich people who've got loads and loads of money. How can financial advisor help me create wealth or provide me with the financial support that I need?
Ricky?
Absolutely. You get that all the time when we're talking to our clients, even to our referral partners. They say, oh, they don't see the value in it, and they just say, oh, we don't have money to invest, or we don't have, the high savings or what you're after. So it's a very common objection that we get all the time.
I can imagine you've seen it as well, Dean.
Oh, definitely. All the time. Once again, exactly like the boys were saying, multiple times, whether it's I've had chats directly with clients where they're like, okay, well, everything is good, doing fine. I'm doing well with everything. I don't really see the value in an advisor, but after our chat, they tend to change their mind pretty quick.
And look, I mean, it is not a far-fetched thought. We're filming in Sydney today, where houses cost millions of dollars. People earn hundreds of thousands of dollars in a household. It's not uncommon for a family to bring in $500,000 every year. So I guess that concept of, how do all of us get to that point? How can we make the most of our money? It is intriguing. So I'm really glad that you guys have tuned into the podcast today, because what I want to talk to you boys about for the rest of the session is sort of top 10 myths that I've collected over my tenure as the manager at Ryker and my previous career that people have thrown at me where they've said, nah, financial advice is not for me. It's only for the rich. How is it going to help me? Because I thought, why don't we let you into some of these secrets? Why don't we let you into some of the things that the richer people do to get to the place of being really rich? Because we've got great news for you. You do not have to be rich to get financial advice. There's a lot you can do. What do you guys think? Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds good.
Does to me, Jazz.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And don't hesitate to share some stories about any of the clients that you might have that do have a bit of dough, just to inspire the listeners, okay? So the first thing that I want to talk about is probably the main barrier of entry for people when it comes to obtaining financial advice. It's the number one objection I get. Advice is too expensive. I don't have the money to pay for it. In actual fact, when I introduced myself to the guys filming the podcast today, that was the first question I got, is how much is it going to cost me? So I might start with you, Ricky. What are your thoughts? Is financial advice too expensive?
Well, Jad, when I get this from a client, I say to them, compared to what? I mean, if you look at, If you go to your solicitor, how much do you pay there? If you sell a house, well, the real estate agents generally is 2 to 3% of the value of the house sold. So it comes down to compared to what? It's putting a value on your financial future, on your financial well-being, so which you pay as a one-off cost. Yes, there are costs involved, but it's a one-off cost to ensure your financial well-being for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is looked after. So I think it is quite important that we put that in perspective. Because I think perspective is always important to go compared to what.
Oh, good point.
Very good.
Dean, what are your thoughts when clients say that to you?
Once again, pretty similar, but I think with myself, the amount of clients that I've seen and that I've helped, the benefit that the client receives heavily outweighs the cost.
Well, that's great news. Can you give us a little bit of an example of some benefits you might have added to clients?
Whether it's structuring superannuation for them, boosting their retirement savings, whether it's basic tax strategic advice where clients saving a couple of $1,000s every single year from an income tax perspective. I know I had a client earlier this week, funny enough, where I was helping them getting prepared for retirement. And through a couple of changes and things that I was able to do for them, I was able to save them roughly around about $2,000 a year just on their super fees. But then also as well, got a bit of helping them with the structure to give them roughly around about just under $4,000 each on its income tax saving per person. So if you look at that on its own, that's putting the client $10,000 ahead every single year.
Ray, do you want to talk a little bit about the compounding effect of something like that?
Massive. Absolutely massive, Jazz. If you look at and I'm going to circle back to the same question there. We work with a lot of referral partners like mortgage brokers and accountants, and they seem to have the similar sort of thought process of going, how will you be able to add value to my customer situation in order to justify those fees? Now, to the point that obviously Ricky and Dean have brought up, if you compare that to the significant amount of savings that you would see in your super fund, in your financial well-being, saving tax on your personal tax, saving tax on your super. Now, you compound those effects over the next 10, 15 or 20 years, depending on what life stage you're at, it is huge. It is absolutely huge. The compounding effect will not only sort of then help you grow that money over a course of period of time, but also add value in terms of your financial well-being on what you're going to be able to retire on or what you're going to be able to save in your tax, which can then go towards paying down your home loan or providing for some of the other financial goals and objectives that you might have in mind, whether adding another property or whether it be sort of to provide for the kids' school fees.
I can't agree with you more. And I think another concept that we need to bring up here, might point to you with that one, Ricky, is just around the fact that the government recognises that if you are prepared to invest into your future, you may be able to do something with your taxes if you've got to pay for advice. Any thoughts on that?
It absolutely is, Jazz. Depending on the fees you pay, there may or may not be, you may be able to deduct them, especially the ongoing service fees. And I'll encourage people to talk to their accountants about it. If there are ongoing fees that you're paying, especially to which account, to which service. So if it's super, then it's different. If it's for your own personal investment, that could potentially be deductible. And even the one-off cost, the one-off fee that people pay could be considered as a capital cost and could be considered when they buy and sell investments. So it could be used to offset the capital gains tax. So again, that's where it is. There are options there. However, I would recommend people to talk to their accountants as well on that.
Look, I'm going to consider this myth as busted because the opportunity cost of not getting advice is really putting you into that space of people that are never going to be too rich to get financial advice because they're not putting their best foot forward. If you need help to get to that first step, whether it's buying an investment property, whether it's organizing your super really well, whether, it's maybe about chatting to your advisor first so you can restructure your position so that when you get to your accountant, you're really in a good position to save tax. I think you've got to make that investment in yourself and in your family. But the advisors are also really skilled in making sure that we show you as a client how you can afford to pay for those fees. So love that, guys. Let's have that first myth declared busted. Awesome. The second one here that I wanted to talk about is just a deep dive into something that you mentioned, Ray, and that's about financial advice adding value. So I've spoken to people before that, quite cluey. They might be in a related field. They might be really good studying things. They might be up to date with the news. And they might be saying things like, financial advice is a myth. It doesn't really add enough value to me. I know what I'm doing and I don't need the help. So can you guys talk to me a little bit about why is an advisor a specialist? And deep dive into this concept of value you get from financial advice?
Financial advice, if you look at the spectrum of it, is broken into a variety of different concepts and structures. Now, what I mean by that is a holistic view of looking at financial planning from what financial planner covers is tax planning. It's around social security systems. It's around insurances. It's around superannuation. It's around aged care. It's around any other part of intrinsic part of advice like UK pensions or any other form of estate planning. So there's a broad range of topics that are ingrained in financial planning. So it all depends again on customers' specific circumstances and how do we sort of plan that each stage of their life out is sort of how the financial planner add value there.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ray. And I think you're bringing up a very important point here around us all being an individual. So, it's great if you're opening up the Sunday paper and you're reading about opportunities of investment or, you're reading about how you might be able to save tax. But we found most of the clients that we help have missed certain strategies, or they haven't been able to apply them to their own situations. One of the things, for instance, is the First Home Savers Grant. So that's a concept that the government's launched, and it seems pretty easy on the surface. You can go and have a read about the ins and outs of that on the ATO website, for example. But when the clients sit in front of us, when they're in the chair and we've got a couple sitting there and we sort of start breaking down, okay, so you earn this much and you earn this much and you've got these expenses and your employer is paying this much into your super, and how do you even pay it into that super fund? How do you get it back out? It does become a lot more complex than that. Now, as financial advisors, we've got to strike a balance between breaking down the complexity and making it seem pretty simple to the end customer. But at the same time, the things we think about, it's probably a million data points that we go through in our head. And that's why I brought the very experienced advisors with me today, that we simply compute for our clients, kind of like AI technology, if you like, that we don't even verbally speak about to the client because it would overwhelm them with information. So I think if you really dig deep, that gives you an understanding of the benefit that you can add to clients, guys. I think you just do that. It's second nature for you. But because I'm more in an observing role, I see that true value that you really add. So if you're thinking about whether a financial advisor can add value to you, maybe have a go at an initial consult and really talk in depth about yourself, your partner, your family's position, maybe even your extended family. And I will guarantee you will walk away with at least one or two things that you've never thought of before. So that to me is the true value of advice. Any final thoughts on that? Maybe from you, Ricky?
Absolutely does. It is quite important because every client that walks in through the door sitting in front of us, they are different. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Some clients have made money selling their land or selling their business, or some are accumulating money. Some are going through divorces, some are getting married, some are having babies, some are retiring. So every client situation is unique and different. And as a financial advisors, we look at that different situation. How can it be improved? How can it be enhanced? If they are in their mid-30s, they're buying a house, they're thinking about having a family, so ensuring that they're protected, they're accumulating wealth at the same time. As they move on their life cycle, they might think about starting to retire, so they're adding another investment property, boosting their super by having some more retirement capital. And then when they retire, it's all about drawing that money to live on because they want to ensure that they don't run out of that money. And finally, if you go one step further, then as one of the couple dies, they might even think about aged care. So there's a variety of different places. It doesn't matter where the client is in their life cycle. Speaking to a financial advisor would certainly help.
I'm going to consider that myth busted because just the simple benefit of having someone that can hold your hand, throughout your lifetime when it comes to these really complex things is already a huge amount of value added. I want to turn to something that I hear a lot. We work really closely with a lot of accountants. I actually think an accountancy firm sits in this building that we're filming in today. Accountants and financial planners often get mentioned in the same breath, in the same sentence by clients. I want to talk a little bit about this myth that, well, if I've already got an accountant, why do I need a financial planner?
That's an interesting one. And again, we get that all the time. So I think where there is if you look at the occupation of what an accountant does and what an advisor does, yes, there are some overlapping structures where accountant can speak about certain items, but there's a license restriction as to what they can't cross over. Mm-hmm. So we work hand in hand with accountants to sort of help them provide that advice to the end customer. However, accountants generally can't advise on strategic asset allocation on a super fund or an investment fund. They can't advise on insurance to go whether you should do X, Y, and Z and take out income protection, life or disability cover because this will help you protect it, or this is the value you should have. Or perhaps around the estate planning side to go, well, if you pass on X amount of money through your super to your wife, this is the tax you might pay or you may not pay. So it all circles around the license that you've got and the advice that you can provide in that part of the occupation category. Some occupations some accountants may have a financial planning license, then they might be allowed to provide that advice. But generally, when we work with most of the accountants, we do sort of work hand in hand with them to enhance that end customer's financial position.
I'll just add to that as well. I think, and I can even use my personal experience as well. Every time I go to the accountant to do my tax, the first thing that they ask me is, okay, so what was your income? What was your expenses? And things like that. So a lot of the time, it's more about them looking at what's already happened, what's happened throughout the year. Very rarely, it's not about, okay, well, what can we do next year? It doesn't really look into the future. Whereas that's the value of what an advisor can do. So yes, it's great. You've worked, you've done everything, but what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve long term? And I think that's the value of where the advisor could come in, just trying to see from a long-term perspective and what we can help our clients with.
I love that. I mean, I could declare this myth busted right now, but it's too good an opportunity to pass up. So is there one thing, Ricky, that you can tell us that a client could do today to actually decrease their tax liability for the next year?
There certainly are, Jad. Speaking to a financial advisor would help a client to look at their position, where they are now and where they want to go. So when I meet a client, where we talk about clients' goals of what they want to achieve, where do they want to be, and then we put a roadmap or a plan to ensure that we get to that goal. Now, getting to that goal involves a variety of different strategies and could also include a lot of tax deduction or tax structuring to ensure that they get to that goal to a point. So an example could be client wants to retire with a healthy balance, but then we might also get a backup, having an income protection policy to ensure that if they cannot work, they still have that income coming in, and that premium that they're paying for the policy is potentially tax deductible.
I love that. There is one final comment that I want to make that will definitely bust this myth for anyone listening and watching, and that is the fact that we have accountants call us on a weekly basis, asking us for support to help their clients to reduce taxes. I just thought it might be nice for you, Ray, to share that example of the couple that we helped when they sold the investment property, when the accountant actually rang you and referred the couple through to you to help them with their capital gains tax liability.
Absolutely, Jazz. I think we've had a very fortunate couple who, Jeff and Lynn, obviously sold their property. They had a substantial amount of capital gain tax that they had incurred as a result of selling the property. Mind you, they've acquired the property quite a few years ago. In saying that, I think when they sort of sold their property, they had this large amount of gain. Accountant was very conscious not to breach his obligation as far as going with the client to sort of recommend them on making contributions into the super fund or looking at their previous contribution history and recommending them to make a catch-up concessional contribution. Now, I'll quickly explain catch-up concessional contribution. What catch-up is, if you look back over your 5 years of what you haven't contributed, into your super fund over that period of time, you can sort of bring that forward if you like, and then utilize that as a measure of tax deduction.
So if I've put in some money into super, there's only an amount I can put every year, isn't there?
That's right, Joe. So
Okay, so then that changes all the time.
That changes all the
So that's why
time.
we don't name the number, right?
Correct.
So you've always got to check every year how much you can put in. So if I haven't put it in for a period of time before this year, I can catch up.
spot on.
Right. Okay.
Right. So now what's happened is we've utilised some of their catch-up contributions they haven't utilised over that period of time, made that contribution and reduced their capital gain tax, and to a substantial amount, which then allowed customer to pay themselves and reduce their capital gain tax. So the money is in my pocket and I haven't paid tax on it.
I love that. And this is definitely the proof in the pudding, I think. Accountants ringing into our offices, referring their clients through to us on a regular basis. So it is important that you don't think just because you already have an accountant that you love and work with, you can't have a financial advisor or shouldn't have one. We work really closely with those guys. Myth busted.
Indeed.
The next thing that I wanted to talk about actually relates back to something you just said, right? I've had clients come to me before and said that they don't think they've got a lot in super and they're really kind of worried about that. Usually this starts to happen when people are in their 50s. Before then super statement comes in and we sort of pay a little bit of attention, but not too much. But when they get to that age where retirement becomes a much closer reality for them in their lives, and they sort of come and ask, why do I not have a lot in my super? And I just feel like there's nothing I can do because my work puts money in, but it just doesn't seem to be enough. So I think the myth there is that they think they can't add to their super. Dean, is that correct?
You can always add money back into super. There's various ways and various structures and strategies to be able to do that. I'll probably say depending on your personal circumstances, but you can utilize something called concessional contributions, meaning adding funds pre-tax income. As long as you're not breaching and going over the cap, you can actually claim a tax deduction on adding that little bit of extra money back into super. Which is really, really good. And then the other thing as well is you've also got something called a non-concessional contribution as well, which is adding money back into super coming from an after-tax source. And then there's obviously caps on that as well. So there's various types of contributions that the government allows us to utilize, and that can all be used together to help really boost your retirement savings, which will be very, very important when coming to retirement.
What about self-employed people though, Ray? They can't add money to super, right?
I'll have to call Miss Busted on that, Jazz. I'm sorry about that. Taking it away from you there. You absolutely can. Much like any other PAYG, if you like. Again, the ideas or the structures that we create for some of our self-employed customers is mostly around, it's either we pay tax on that income that you've earned, or perhaps we sort of put some of that money in our own pocket and then claim that as a tax deduction. So the primary idea being is to boost your retirement. The added benefit of that is we save on taxes. So it's, for me, looking from a self-employed perspective, I always encourage my clients to go, hey, let's put money in our own pocket and then claim that as a tax deduction.
Love that.
If I give that money away, I ain't going to see it. So at least I'll have that in my super fund balance there.
And just to give everyone some comfort, the government is really keen on us adding money to our super, and they make it attractive to us with all these tax deductions. And it's a really awesome concept if you think about it. They're empowering us as a society to put away some money for later. They're empowering us to be self-sufficient when we retire, having choices around, the kind of lifestyle we want to live. And they're making it really attractive for us because they're giving us those tax deductions. So if you haven't explored this, you really need to, because it's very important that you think about this earlier rather than later. Ricky, what are your thoughts? If you start adding money now when you're in your 20s, 30s, or when you see clients that come in that are closer to age 60, there is a difference, isn't there?
Absolutely. It all comes down to adding money early. The sooner you can start adding money early, it has a compounding effect into your any investment. So you could have, if clients are looking at saving money to buy a house, We can look at having a savings plan into an investment account depending on the time frame, and then it just builds up. The super saver scheme that you mentioned about, that's a great idea. That allows people to put money into super, it's concessionally taxed, and allows them to boost that saving rather than having it personally in their own name. When they think about retiring, it's all about making contribution. So again, the sooner you start with the compound interest, you see the balance going up.
Awesome. Well, Ray, you busted that myth
I did
earlier.
indeed.
So,
Sorry, I took that away from you.
Nah, it's okay. I love a little bit of myth busting as a team. The other thing that I wanted to bring up to the table is another massive myth that I hear about so much in my travels, when I give presentations, when I talk to people. And that myth is that all financial planners do is just look after your products. And I've got that sorted. I've got my super. I'm good. What are your guys' thoughts on that one?
I think it's a lot deeper to that. I think as an advisor, we predominantly mainly focus on what's the end result. What are we working towards? What are we really trying to achieve? Whether that's wanting to have a retirement with, say, $100,000 income a year, or whether that's potentially you wanting to buy a property and you want to start saving to buy a property. When it comes to products, we're as advisors, we're not aligned to any particular product provider or anything like that. We do some extensive research in the marketing and get a good understanding of, based on your circumstances, based on your situation, which is going to be the best provider or product that will get you there in the most effective and efficient manner. It's just part of the strategy, but the real goal and objective here is more around helping the client through the journey and get to their goals.
Well said. Ricky, I know that you love the technical aspect of giving advice, and I know that you are someone that deep dives into the technology that we use sometimes. So in this context of thinking about clients and their goals, what are some of the powerful tools advisors have at their disposal that really nobody else does that can help clients?
There are a lot of things that we do, Jad, in the background that clients don't get to see. So we do, when we are looking at different products, for example, we look at different what the benefits are of each product. So we go through the product disclosure statement of each product, for example. We look at the ratings of different products when you're looking at insurances, for example. So there's multitude of different things. When we're researching products, we look at what really is clients' preferences towards that product. We use that to ensure the product that client gets is what they match it in line with their needs and objectives. So there is a lot of things that goes in the background which client don't get to see.
And further to that, to Ricky's point, I think the ratings and the product structure only goes so far. Then you have to further align that as part of their tax strategies, align that as part of their estate planning strategies as to how do they want that money to be passed on to the future generation, or to the spouse, to their kids, or to their other members of their family. So then it becomes very imperative that whenever you're aligning these goals and objectives and looking fast forward into the future for the customer, that you are looking at every single part of the 2 years, the 5 years, the 10-year plan, and how will that align? And then we sort of do a bit of a check back every year or 2 years to go, hey, how did we go? Ray, how do we sort of perform this year? Maybe it wasn't such a good year this year, but I think fast forward again, if you utilize the dollar cost averaging or other part of strategies, how can we sort of put our foot forward in a way that we are much better off next year?
Well said. And it just draws my mind to a document that we give clients. So when you meet with a financial advisor, once we've gotten to know you, we understand what your goals are, we actually break those goals down into little steps. So we sit with a couple or a family, sometimes single clients as well, and we really challenge them to think a lot more deeply about their goals. So we might break down a goal from, I want to be rich, to, well, what does rich mean to you? If you had X amount of money, would you feel that way? And very often we get people to think about, 3 years from now, where do I want to be? 5 years from now, 10 years, and so on. And then towards the end of that document, we actually give them access to something that's super powerful. They're visual graphs and tables, depending on what kind of, person you are. Some people prefer lots of information in a table. Some people prefer words, but others really like the visual graphs, where we give them an understanding of, depending on which strategies we implement together for them, where they will end up in the future. And this ability to be able to see where you are going to be if you diligently put some money away, if you take those steps to save the tax and then put that towards another investment, that's really powerful for people. So I think that advisors do much more than just give clients access to products. I think that this is actually one of the most powerful things that we do as advisors.
Yeah. And products is the end part of the goal. It's products the very end part of the strategy. Primarily, what we look at is the goals and objectives, and how do we get you there? How do we get you there in the most efficient, tax structured or process whereby it will help you add value to your life? Products, we've got access to all the products in the market that's possibly there is, which is what we call our approved product list for super insurances, investments or otherwise. So the product becomes the last piece of the puzzle and will firstly align everything with your goals and objectives, tax strategies, estate planning, and then we'll sort of go, right, which product is the best product that's going to nurture our client and help our client get there.
Perfect. Well, I mean, I'm going to throw this one to you, Dean. Do you think we've busted the myths that all advisors do is give product advice?
I think the myth's been busted.
Fabulous. There's another topic I wanted to talk about today that's really close to my heart. As financial advisors, we work very closely with product providers, for example, superannuation funds. And we very highly value what they do because they've got an important job to do in society. There's an enormous amount of super funds out there now. And talking to any of them, you'll get a lot of commentary from them about the things that they do, the things that they do well. And we've also seen probably mainly in the last 10 years, a surgence of them trying to give information to clients about how funds are tracking from a performance perspective, how the economy is going, and the super funds have tried to give a little bit more information about what clients can do to make the most of their super. But I think that when clients come and say to me, look, Jasmine, I don't really need financial advice because my super's doing all of that for me. You know, I've given them my money, they invested, and whatever investment they've picked for me, I believe that that's the best. I call that's actually a myth. And I'm going to call out today that I don't think that's true. I think that there's a lot more to superannuation and your relationship with your super fund than just how it's invested. And sort of getting the newsletters is great. But guys, what do you usually do with clients when you see them? How do you take it to the next level?
When we meet clients, Jazz, we look at, you're right, so super funds do have a default option. So what that means is if a client, when they join the super fund or when they join the new employer and they join the default fund, they will be put into an option, which is called a default option, which is where the money goes. Regardless if that's their personal preference aligned with that product or not, that option or not, that doesn't really matter. That's the default option. That's where it goes. So what I mean by not aligning with their personal preference is a client may not be comfortable taking a lot of risk with their investment, for example. And the default investment could be investing a lot of money into shares and property, what we call a growth assets, which tend to be more volatile. So if the client's nearing retirement and they've been put into a default option where it's more volatile and the market drops or market crashes, guess what's going to happen to the super fund? It's going to drop along with it, right? Yes. And that affects their retirement. So it's the default option where a member gets put into is probably not the right or the best option. Doesn't, like I said before, one size doesn't fit all. So it needs to be looked at what their right preferences are. So when we sit with the client, we understand how would they like to invest the money? What is their, what we call a risk profile, which determines what exposure are they comfortable with when to invest that money? Because the money in super can be invested into a lot of different options. Not only that, do we look at what their outside investments are to ensure that the whole profile is made up of a holistic profile. So those are the things that we look at to ensure that clients are invested properly. I've just had a client recently who was so concerned about the market volatility and they were invested in growth fund. And I said to them, hang on, well, look, if you are really concerned, that's probably not the fund for you to be in. And then we had to bring it down a little bit, invest more in defensive assets, which are more cash and bonds and fixed interest type assets to ensure that they're not getting that volatility. Default option may not be the right one for them.
I'll just add to that as well. I think there's also been such a large shift in the industry at the moment now around social and ethical investing. So if it's something that you're very, very passionate about as well, potentially just what your default options are might not really be aligning to your personal goals and views and objectives. And that's why it's actually important to actually have a chat to someone to see whether or not things can be changed around.
It's very, very important. I mean, I was writing a speech for my daughter's school speech contest with her, and they speak, I mean, she's 8 years old, and the things that they think about the oceans, you know, they think about the fish, they think about what can we do to reduce the use of plastic. So I think it's very important for the generations that are coming behind us to have us think about these things. So, you know, I love that you've brought that up, because it's going to be very close to a lot of people's hearts. And superannuation is going to become one of your biggest assets over time. So having that invested in a way that suits your needs and aligns with your philosophies and your ethics, super important. But one of the things you just said earlier, Ricky, made me think of a client, Ray, that you and I saw together where there was a bit of a mismatch. So the client had awesome goals. They were taking let's buy a caravan and travel around Australia to another level, because their plan was to buy a yacht in retirement and actually sail around the world.
Right.
But at the same time, that's why you reminded me, Ricky, because they said, but we're quite risk averse and we don't really want to risk our money. So we had a very, very lengthy educational conversation with these guys about that mismatch, didn't we?
We did, Jazz. I think it was just coming back to aligning their priorities and their goals, and the longevity of that money. I think that's where the key critical decision had to come. Whilst as defensive as they were going to outlive their money. Simple as. So then we had to sort of work out a plan B to go, how do we manage that longevity risk in their super monies? Or perhaps what are some of the actions they can take now, or some aggressive actions they can take now to build up that retirement capital? Because when you think about retirement, I always think of it as a holiday. Now, what I mean by that is when you go on a holiday, you don't worry about spending that $10,000, $15,000, right? You spend that with the mindset that you're on a holiday and you want to enjoy your holiday. Now, retirement's that 20-year holiday, and you got to fund that 20-year holiday. So you've got to make sure you've got that adequate amount of capital and wanting to do things that you want to do in retirement, and you don't outlive your money.
Agreed. And I think the superannuation fund, as great as they are and as much support as they lend, they cannot deep dive into the multitude of members that they have in this way. So us being able to sit with that couple and telling them what they needed to do with part of their money to ensure that they have enough to live their dream in retirement, that's why I'm going to declare this myth busted, because super funds do a great job and they will invest the money the way that you tell them or use the default. But that's not right for everyone. So we definitely encourage you to get some personal advice to understand how you should invest your super money. Another thing that's really close to my heart, and we're still staying on the track of super, and I do have to be honest, if I'm sitting in a client conversation and I ask the question of the client, okay, let's talk about something a little bit more serious for a moment. What happens if you're not here anymore? What happens if, we've come to the end of our life and you're not around? Let's talk about your financials. Let's talk about your estate planning. Let's speak about how your family is going to cope when you're not around. That in itself is a long conversation that I would encourage all people to have.
Got a bit heavy there, Jazz.
But in particular, I want to deep dive into something that a lot of people have said to me, and that is, well, if I die, my super money just goes to my will, and then that's paid out to my family. I want to talk about that specific topic. Whoever wants to start, guys, is that a myth or is that the truth?
Not necessarily that it will end up in your estate. I think there's a couple of things that you need to sort of keep that in mind whenever you have a look at the super fund. Is there's a thing called the beneficiary structure in your super fund. Now, there might come in a variety of different names. There might be preferred beneficiary, there might be non-binding, there might be binding. So I think it's key to understand firstly what does those statements stand for. So if I look at the word non-binding or the preferred, it's not binding the trustee. Now, trustee being that XYZ super fund. The trustee has the discretion of deciding whether to pay to that person that's been nominated in that super fund. Now, for many of the people, it's very, very important that the money goes to the person they have nominated
in that super fund structure, especially in a society where we see a lot of divorce and marriages and everything else that happens in between. In that later part of life, people want to make sure that they want the money to go to the person that is the desired beneficiary in that structure. Now, non-binding beneficiary does not provide that security blanket, if you like.
So myth's already busted. So you are telling me that you definitely have not got safety and security that whatever is in your super will just go to your will. You've got to take some action.
You do indeed. Now, to further take that a step further, some of these beneficiaries, now let's just say if you do decide to make it binding on the other hand, which is binding the trustee to pay that person only, and the trustee must pay that person. So hence the word binding means that you are binding the trustee to pay that specific person. In some scenarios, super fund cases, they may expire that beneficiary, and I think you've got to be cautious with that.
What do you mean expire?
It's a very interesting fact, Jazz. Look, some of the super funds will take that upon themselves to expire that beneficiary after 3 years. And I get the purpose or the understanding from the super fund is that after 3 years, you may not be married to that person, and that person may not be the desired beneficiary. And hence some of the super funds will do that. Whereas other super funds will have that binding nomination structure whereby it is there unless you tell us who you would like to nominate as a beneficiary, we'll leave that as being binded.
No, we find most of our clients, once they understand these concepts, really do select a non-lapsing binding beneficiary nomination.
Spot on.
Because having that opportunity to lock that in for what's right for your family after having gotten that advice, that definitely is the preference for most of our clients.
On the other hand, we've had customers at the same time who've just gone, oh yes, I've completely forgotten that I had that beneficiary and I want to change that. Yes. So it does serve a purpose. But yes, you're right. In most of the cases, what we've seen is customers do want that security blanket. They don't want trustee to have that discretion whether they should pay that person or not. And they don't want that money tied up into the long family court battle to go,
gone to the wrong person.
Gone to the wrong person.
What if I've done my estate planning though? What if I've sat with a solicitor, my will is exactly how I want it, and I don't want to have to deal with another structure there? Ricky, is there a way to make sure your super goes to your will?
Well, Jazz, there is within your super, you can nominate for it to go to your will. Superannuation generally sits outside of will, so you can, as we've discussed before, you can nominate a person and it will go to them. However, if you go through the will process, if you go put it to the estate is open to be challenged, and there could be a different scenarios out of that. So whenever I'm seeing a client, I would prefer for them to make a binding nomination if they've got a blended family or if they've got a preference that they want to make sure that their wife or their kids get the money. So then we do put in that in place. Because then as soon as the event occurs or client dies, the superannuation funds then get directed to their nominated beneficiary rather than going through a estate, which could be challenged. There's a lot of issues around it. So generally speaking, when we speak to the client, we do say to them, what are your nomination options? Some clients do prefer to go to their will because they just said, I've spoken to my lawyer, I've got my thing sorted, I would like it to go into my estate, and then the estate can divide that.
Yes, and I think there are also scenarios where people might not have a family unit or people to consider. They might have nominated charities in their will or other things.
Exactly.
So it's an option, but as you can see, myth busted, okay? So it's not as straightforward as you think. It doesn't take long to resolve, so I would encourage everybody to really put some thought towards that. I want to talk about two more myths before we go to the final one, and those two myths are about retirement planning. So one of the things that we have a lot of clients come in and say to us is that they're not worried about planning for their retirement because when they get old and they are at that age, they're just going to go to Centrelink and they're going to get a pension. Now you can see all my advisors smiling and laughing and going, yeah, that would be a beautiful dream. To me, that's a myth. So why don't you guys give us some of your thoughts on how much money you get from Centrelink and if that's enough, etc.
Well, going to Centrelink depends on, when we're talking to clients, we do factor that in because it is an important part of retirement planning because if we can get additional money, that would help client increase the longevity of the funds make sure that they enjoy their lifestyle a little bit longer. However, Centrelink is means tested, which when I say means tested, Centrelink would look at your assets and your income. and that would determine the amount of money or support that you'll get. We've had clients where they are not eligible for it. So what it means is they can't get any income support from the government and they have to rely on their own super fund. So it just boils down to what their situation is at retirement. Having said that, even though they can't get income support from the government, there are different options that they can still get. They can still get some health cards, which still assist them in their reducing their living expenses, it reduces their medical bills. So it still helps the client in their retirement. However, just the myth that I'll retire and I will get government pension, it's not really true.
No, and I mean, do you guys want to give us a little bit of an understanding of what you could potentially afford to pay for if you just had Centrelink pension in retirement?
I think the life will be very tough, Jazz, if I just relied on the government pension of $800 a fortnight or $900 a fortnight. If you're living in Sydney especially, think about the cost of living. An average family would normally spend perhaps $55,000 or $60,000, and again, I'm just throwing that number out there. To rely on Centrelink or government benefit at that amount of money, it does not give you a whole lot of room to enjoy your life or the later part of your life. And look, unfortunately, some of the people are living in that condition where they have to rely on that small amount of money. But I can certainly say with hand on heart, it's to rely just purely on the government pension side would not be a very smart strategy.
No, and I think the people that are listening to the Wealth Guide podcast are interested in the financial side of things. So I'm going to put it out there that the myth is busted because all of you guys listening to us and watching us want to do more with your money. So having that Centrelink pension is not going to give you the retirement you imagine. Let's take this thought one step further. I hear a lot of people come through our doors that say, I'm buying a home, I'm starting a family. Thank you for helping me with all of that. But I'm too young to plan for my retirement. Dean, I can see you cringing there because we know, what a mountain it is to climb to plan for your retirement. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? Is that a myth or is that the truth?
Well, look, it's definitely a myth. I like to use an example when it comes to retirement savings. I think going back to what Ray was saying as well, the earlier you plan for your retirement, then it makes your retirement and that goal of retirement a lot easier to achieve. I know I saw a client a couple of months ago and he was quite young. He was 31 and he purchased a property. He's got a young family and so forth. And then after looking into his situation, part of the recommendations was for us to add a little bit of extra money. And I think in his situation was like $100 a week into super. And because it compounds and because it gets invested, the material difference when I modeled it out for him, it literally had caused his super to almost, I wouldn't say double, but almost double. And the reason behind that is once again, you think of it, a little bit of money is being added, and then it just compounds in the long run. And the way that I see it as well, and the example that I like to use is that everyone's got a mortgage. If you're adding an additional $50 to $100 a week onto that mortgage, what's naturally going to happen to the mortgage?
It'll reduce a lot quicker.
Right? So it works the same thing with your super. If you're adding a little bit of extra money into it so often, then what will happen is in the long term, your super will really, really start to grow. And then goes back to Ray's point, then you're not going to have to entirely rely on Centrelink to be able to fund that retirement that you want to have.
Love that analogy of yours, Dean, about adding to the mortgage. But yeah.
And I think the really cool thing is you can probably do both. Because if you're sitting with an advisor and you lay out to them what your goals are, but then you've got that professional opinion on top of your thoughts that says, let's keep thinking about all of these lanes that are on the 6-lane highway at the same time and allocate a little bit of your resources to each of these issues at a time. I can absolutely bust that myth. It's going to be 100,000 times easier to slowly and cleverly save for your retirement than it is going to be when you are already up there when it comes to age. So myth busted.
Done.
Last myth for us for the day before we close that session is probably my favorite. I don't need a financial advisor. I can do all of this myself. And I don't even really think we need to say too much more because we've just gone through 9 other myths that have shown you that you can do certain things on your own, but having an advisor by your side will make sure you make the most of your money, make sure you are cleverer than someone that hasn't received advice, make sure your assets are set up the way that you want them to be set up, make sure you get additional benefits along the way. So I'm going to consider that myth busted. What do you think, guys?
Jazz, there is a place for it, obviously, in a sense that obviously some of the people who work in the align industry may know the structures and may know how the financial planning works. But yes, what we sort of work with a lot of people in the industry or outside the industry, they do need some form of help in order to sort of understand the various facets of those financial planning. So I think even though if you work in the industry, I think you're absolutely right. It just does not hurt to have a quick chat or just speak to someone to go, hey, I've considered this, this, and this. Is there anything that you think I've missed out on? And as advisor, we'll go, look, I think you've very well covered everything in that instance. Or perhaps there might be a couple of instances that you might want to think about that you might not have considered into the mix of things.
I like to add to that too, and that's similar to that. Like, you know, I don't go to doctor every year. I'll go to doctor when I need it. So similar to financial planning. You know, it's looking at the situation, reviewing it, making sure everything's okay, everything's right on track. We have coaches, we have like personal trainers. I'll go to a personal trainer to get fit. Top athletes have coaches. So it's just making sure that you have someone on your side that can help you, guide you. And some clients we might have to see every year. Some clients it's setting it up and then we don't have to see them for a few years. And then we see them again if the situation changes. And then we look at the situation again.
Amazing. Well, that myth's definitely busted because you're going to be better off with an advisor than you will be without.
I hope you enjoyed our episode today. If you like to learn and listen to more of our episodes, please like and subscribe and follow us on the channel.